Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Parent Education video series hosted by the Grand Prairie Police Department, Grand Prairie Libraries, and Big Brothers Big Sisters. I'm happy to see all of you today. This is going to be a wonderfully organic conversation. The topic is cyber safety for children. And as parents, we want to do everything we can to keep our children safe. And during these times of them spending a lot of time on the internet because of Zoom and COVID and just time at home, there's a lot of things out there that parents can do to keep kids safe, to alleviate some anxiety, and to keep predators away from our children. This is going to be a great conversation, very casual, very organic, and I'll get this started by introducing myself. My name is Chelsea Kretz, and I'm one of the public information officers at the Grand Prairie Police Department. It's located in North Texas. I will go ahead and toss this over to our detectives, Detective Brandon Poor and Detective Rick Branham. They'll introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with the Q&A.
All right. Well, I'll go first, Chelsea. My name is Detective Rick Branham. I'm a police officer here at the Grand Prairie Police Department. I am currently assigned to the grand jury liaison for our department, but I'm also attached to the child crimes unit, where I've been since 2013. And that time I've worked hundreds of cases, anywhere from child abuse to sexual assault of a child, up and we've worked some capital murder death cases also. I do this job because I believe in protecting the children. Here in the department, we talk about them being our victims, they're just so young and nobody to protect them. That's our job to do it. I'm glad to see you here today, though, just for the fact that this is a teamwork effort. It's us in the community that puts an end to child abuse. So step one is y'all being here. I thank you and look forward to giving you some information.
My name is Detective Brandon Poor. I'm a detective here at the Grand Prairie Police Department, and I am assigned to the Internet Crimes Against Children unit. I'm also assigned to a federal child exploitation and human trafficking task force, and I've been in the unit for the last 7 years approximately. I started off working cases that involved the hands-on sexual abuse and physical abuse of children, as well as, like Detective Branham, we worked child death and homicide cases. And then I transitioned in 2016 to the Internet Crimes Against Children unit, where I investigate all crimes that occur online involving the exploitation of a child. As Detective Branham said, we're big believers in that our truly innocent victims are children that we must protect. And we believe that the only way to end child sexual abuse is through education and awareness, teaching parents how to protect their kids and make their child aware of what's going on, and how to teach kids to protect themselves online.
Thank you for those introductions. Caprice, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Thanks, Chelsea. I guess, Detective Poor, my first question would be to you. What is the biggest issue facing parents today regarding cyber awareness for their kids?
Absolutely. It is children communicating with strangers online and unknown persons to them. Oftentimes, kids aren't aware of the dangers of talking to someone that they have not met in real life. And so the ability to send nude images or be sent nude images by unknown persons is probably the number one issue we're dealing with right now.
And Detective Poor, where are children most vulnerable regarding devices they use?
I would say cell phones are probably the most vulnerable places for children, because it seems that most kids have a cell phone or tablet, and that parents are using those devices to keep in contact with their kids through the day. But unfortunately, those are also the ways that these offenders and predators that prey on our kids online are also communicating without the parents knowing.
Detective Branham, who is targeted and by whom?
Any child who's communicating online is a potential target, whether that be through working on school through Zoom or on video games. And we know predators typically target children who are more vulnerable due to personal or home issues. Those kids tend to be sought out and then directed to another form or platform to be spoken to by the suspect or defendant.
Detective Branham, why are children being targeted for cyber issues?
Child predators have and always will go where kids go. Back in the day in the 70s, we talked about the white van, the puppy in the park, the guy with the trench coat. Now with the advent of the internet, It's now where kids hang out and do most of their work, their research, their schoolwork, their buddies and friends are on there. Therefore, where kids are, we have our predators there. This includes messaging apps, video, and gaming applications. Children are often susceptible to the grooming and manipulation that goes on with these things through the sending of message and videos requested.
Detective Burnham, can you share with us how predators are gaining contact with the children?
Yes, ma'am. Due to the availability of the internet, child predators often have unrestricted access to kids who are given an electronic device with little or no supervision at home. These predators communicate and target children through applications on their devices, private messaging, and then through sending and receiving images and videos. And if parents aren't checking those devices, the predators have unsolicited just access to the child.
Detective Poor, are there anything that parents or grandparents like myself can do in general to protect kids?
The number one answer I give is get involved. The age of saying, I don't know the technology, so I just can't keep up with that is over. The technology is here to stay. And so if you give your child a device that connects to the internet, any electronic device that connects to the internet can be a portal through which predators come in contact with children. So learn the devices, know all of the applications that you've allowed your child to have on the device, know the passwords. It's your right as a parent to know all of the usernames and the passwords that your child is using on that device, and check it often. Talk with your kids and get to know what they're doing online. And then we also have a number of resources that we give out to parents that we're going to put into the chat box. Some of the resources that we like to recommend come from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So there's a portal there called KidSmarts and NetSmarts, and it's a great place for parents to learn information about electronics and how to protect their kids. There are some other websites that will inform parents about the Catfish Cops website, the Carly Ryan Foundation. Carly Ryan Foundation offers resources. They actually have guides that tell parents exactly how apps that are on devices that their kids have work, and the parental settings that the parents can know how to set the devices so that they can protect the kids online. Child Rescue Coalition, one of the places that I direct more parents to than most is actually Common Sense Media. It gives a really good approach to each of the platforms and websites that kids are able to access on those devices.
Detective Poor, what should a parent do if they think their child has been a victim of cybercrime?
Depending on the extent to what's happened, I would take the electronic device and contact your local law enforcement. Those are the easiest to remember do's in that situation. Unfortunately, the don'ts tend to be a little more than the do's because it's so easy just to take the device and contact law enforcement. So the don'ts we have to warn parents about is don't communicate with the offender in any way. Don't delete any of the communications or allow anything to be deleted until law enforcement directs you to the next course of action. And don't set up any sort of meeting with the offender in hopes to help law enforcement out before they're involved.
Detective Poor, I want to respect some degree of privacy for my teenager, but I'm not always sure what that right degree of privacy should be. Do you have any tips for ways to keep my teen safe, but also build trust?
Yes, privacy and safety online rarely overlap, in my opinion, when it comes to kids and the internet. So privacy should be respected for areas of the child's life as they're developing, such as personal grooming, dressing, those privacy times when they might want some alone time in the house, not on the internet. Maybe communications with a close friend or family member in person. Those are times to be respectful of privacy. But when it comes to online communications, especially with someone that they don't know or when they're being contacted by a stranger online, I don't think privacy is something we need to respect at the risk of safety and at potentially putting the child in more risk because we're worried about privacy's sake.
Detective Brandon, are there any websites or apps that kids might have on their computers or phones that you could talk about that would cause concern right now?
We could go through a host of them. Almost anywhere a child gets on the internet can cause concern for a parent if you're not monitoring it correctly. A lot of these apps will have hidden apps or apps that allow for content to be hidden from the parent's view. It's kind of like my partner, Detective Poor, said, we got to do the research on what these apps can and can't do. Therefore, we can go in and know where to look and what's going on in our child's life. Anywhere from Roblox to Kick can be bad for a child. It's just us as parents to protect them and to keep an eye on those devices for them.
Well, Detective Brenham, are there any behavioral signs that parents should watch for to indicate that their child is interacting with someone inappropriately online?
I'll answer that one actually, because we see so many times when these signs start to occur. Anytime that a child is being secretive or refusing to allow a parent to see what was being sent on their device or what communications they're having, if they're unexpectedly receiving gifts of any kind, clothing or other items that have no explanation, that's certainly a cause for concern. Odd hours of communicating or only communicating in times that are not normal for their normal behavior, running away, isolation, all of those can be signs that something's going on that way, or it could be just something's going on in the child's life. Basically, what I think that you should do as a parent is you know your child, get a baseline for what your child is like when they're communicating with their friends or when they're behaving normally online as you would expect as your kid goes. And then if something's out of the ordinary, talk to them. There's no reason that you can't start a conversation and a dialogue to ask what's going on that's causing them to behave out of the ordinary.
Detective Branham, how involved should the school be if you found out your child is being cyberbullied by other kids at school? And what are the legal rights of the child who is being bullied or cyberbullied by kids at school?
That's a great question, and it's one that gets parents a lot. I actually went to one of our SRO supervisors who's with the school district to see what our policies are, just so I didn't give you something that didn't make sense or kind of gave you a shortcoming, so I can speak on the Grand Prairie side of things. And from what he told me is the Grand Prairie ISD, along with our police department, they're committed to fostering a bully-free environment. What they did is they came up with an ad called Stop It, and that allows for an anonymous reporting of bullying to the teachers and the school and the SROs. That way they can follow up on it. What they do in our district and in our schools, they have a review board, and they review to see if that content is just bullying and that needs to be taken care of with school discipline, or if it rises to the level of a criminal offense where the SROs then have to get involved and possible charges taken. But they do a good job. As a parent, you do have rights to go up to the school and find out what's going on with your child. A lot of school districts will not give you information on how the other child might have been punished, but to make sure your child's safe is your right every day of the week.
Hey, Rick, if I could interject, for those who might not be familiar with acronym SRO, do you want to explain what that is and kind of who they are and what they do?
Sure, I'm sorry. It's just a common little phrase we use here because we're used to that. But that's going to be our school resource officers. We have, I believe, 16 in the city of Grand Prairie, and they're assigned to different schools. Our high schools each have 2. Our junior highs have 1, and then every person in the junior high has a partnership with the elementary schools around them. What they do is partner with the kids to make sure they're in a safe environment along with the teachers. They also do a lot of education, a lot of reading to the kids, having lunch with the kids, spending time with the kids, kind of humanizes the badge for the kiddos, but at the same time, it's keeping them safe along with our students and the educators.
Detective Brandon, what is the difference between bullying that should be taken to the school for discipline and bullying that rises to a criminal level?
And that becomes a fine line, and that's why they did start kind of the review board to see where those levels of bullying become criminal. Making fun of someone sometimes, or those things that are told online about someone that are false or not true to make them feel bad, that still hits in that bullying area. Now, once it gets into those threats and a harassment type deal, now it can become a criminal offense where our SROs get involved with more of the legal part. Before that, the school district will take action and hopefully discipline those children to get the bullying as far as name calling, making false statements or accusations against someone to stop. And as always, anything with child pornography or sextortion, extortion, those type of things are always going to be on the criminal level.
Detective Poor, I think Detective Brenham kind of hit on this, but how can parents identify some of those apps that hide things on kids' phones nowadays?
I'd say research. The internet is can be dangerous for people like we're talking about now, but it's a wonderful place to research, particularly apps and places where kids may go. So research those applications. You can do just a broad research topic of hidden applications for phones, and you can do a quick search for that. In iOS and Android platforms, there are apps that hide content without passcodes. So just knowing what those are is a huge step in the right direction. Also knowing that common applications that your kids may be using now sometimes offer ways to hide content or hidden features within them that your kids may know about, but you may not. So Instagram, for instance, there's actually the ability to toggle between accounts just by holding one right-hand corner of the application. So a child can toggle between two accounts. So we actually call that a finsta, a fake Instagram, and kids will sometimes have an Instagram that is available for their parents to see, that's safe and has all of the things that a parent would expect. And then they have another Instagram that's just for their friends and the people that they want to have ongoing relationships with. Snapchat is another one that's very common these days. There are, in certain versions of Snapchat, there's a place called My Eyes Only, which is an encrypted content vault, essentially. And so knowing that those exist, and then knowing when you check your child's phone, what to look for is just a huge step in the right direction to protecting your kid. And it just takes, like I said before, and like my partner said, just getting involved and looking for those things and expecting them to be there.
Can a parent retrieve deleted texts from a phone? And if so, how?
Many times, no. Depending on what application and messaging platform you're talking about. Certainly, if something is backed up to a computer or stored in a computer, or if it's backed up to a cloud account, that is a way that you could perhaps potentially get messages back. But if a crime has been committed, the police departments have tools that allow for the recovery of deleted messages and other content that may not be on the phone anymore, visible to a parent. So there certainly is an aspect of that if you believe a crime has been committed, we may be able to recover those things. But they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, becoming involved on the front end and knowing what those messages are before they can be deleted is probably the best bet for that battle.
How can you remove yourself or your child from a group chat, specifically when you have a combination of iOS and Android users in the group chat? Is that even possible?
Yeah, we get this question a lot, even mostly from adults. There aren't typically ways when you're talking about cross platforms to remove yourself from a group chat. So there are ways to hide alerts, to block callers, and then if worst case scenario, just reach out to the group and say, please remove me, or start a new group. And that's a way to do it without completely resetting your phone, or if it's just out of control, perhaps maybe even changing your number so that you're no longer available for that group chat.
Can one of you speak to the culture of gaming and what potential dangers lurk on those devices?
I'll let Detective Branham chime in if he wants to add on. I'll say that gaming is becoming, or has become, one of the biggest problem areas when we're talking about online safety because of the number of kids that are on these platforms. There are so many opportunities for kids to play games, both from their phones or from a gaming console. There are online server platforms where people video and live chat their games. And then in those things, just as we said before, the ability to communicate with someone that they don't know is the primary danger in that circumstance. Kids, oftentimes when they're gaming, they're talking with people that they don't know and haven't met in person, and they don't think of it as being dangerous because they're in the same gaming environment, and they think that, well, if someone else is talking to me in this game, they've got to just be a fan of the game, and they don't know that they may be being groomed or manipulated to be a victim of some sort of online exploitation. The ability to send and receive files is also more prevalent in gaming circumstances today. So we've seen kids be reached out to by a stranger online and then transition to another platform, a messaging platform or an email platform, so that the communications can continue offline. And often the parents are unaware because what they thought and what they're supervising is the gaming situation, not knowing that the communications have moved elsewhere. Detective Branham actually has a really good point about headphones, so I'll let him speak to that.
And I have a 12-year-old at home. I have a 30-year-old also, and I didn't have to deal with the headphones. So I'm learning as we go. But he was in his room talking, and I realized I didn't know who he was talking to. And that bothered me as a parent. And even after we had our last conversation, myself and Detective Poor, just recently, I heard him talking to someone. And I'm big on just going and taking it to see who he's talking to. And I asked him, I said, who are you talking to? And he gave me a name. And I said, who's that? I'm not familiar with that person. He said, that's my friend's friend. So now I've learned he's making friends through his friends. And all it takes is one of those friends to invite someone into that room that's a predator and fakes to be a friend. And now my child is talking to someone that I have no clue. So I made him hang up the call and explain to him, unless I've okayed this person, you can't talk to anyone else. But lesson learned on my end that there are other people coming in through backdoor channels. As parents, if we're not into it and watching it, they're talking to someone we have no idea about. It's scary.
With the live platforms that everyone is using now with the virtual, are there any dangers on Zoom and Microsoft Teams, especially since those are live platforms?
Yes, ma'am. I guess the pandemic really pushed us into virtual learning environments. And it's been great in some regards because it's allowed people to stay safe and protected in an environment where they're not put at risk from viruses and such. But unfortunately, just as we said before, predators go where kids are. And now that there are more of them in these environments, there are more opportunities for them to be exploited. So anytime you see the ability for a live face-to-face meeting without recording or without some sort of way to store that data, it's always dangerous because we see children being sent or shown illicit material on these platforms. The kids are often talking to someone that they may not see as dangerous because they can see the person, but that's problematic for parents because unless it was recorded by one or the other party, and it may be recorded by the predator, but not recorded by the child. And so there's no way to know what happened on the front end of what in that communication. So the way that we right now, and we're learning along with everyone else as this has gone on, and we're seeing the spike in child exploitation online just grow through exponential ways. We're learning how to kind of guide and advise parents on protecting their kids on that. And so what we've said so far is just to monitor the meetings, listen in and listen and make sure that you're hearing what's being said on both sides. Know that the Zoom meeting invitation needs to be secure, and tell your child or talk with your child about not giving out that detailed information so that other people that are not invited to that meeting can't get in. And then try and secure the meeting as best as possible. A lot of the platforms have worked to try and secure their platforms from those things happening. So maybe reach out and do some Googling research and things like that where you can find out how do we best secure this meeting before it starts. That prevention, I think, will go a long way in protecting your kid.
And also, I'd like to add, where my kiddo goes to school, they're coming up with a online classroom management tool. And if you have kids in your school district, check with them to see what steps they're taking for the security. On this particular one, the teacher can have a one-on-one conversation with my child, but it's recorded and it can only be done between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. during the times of the school day. That way, it's not in the middle of the night, in the evening, or anything. It protects the teacher and the child kind of deal. So no accusations can be made. So check with your school district to see what they're doing to make sure they're putting these plans in place. They caught us on the fly, but we're catching up. But make sure your school district's also catching up.
Yeah.
So as a follow-up to this question, because, we're asking kids as young as kindergarten age, because of virtual learning, to be on Zoom and to be involved, interact on a device. What do you think the appropriate age is for a child to have a phone? And when should you start having these safety conversations with your kids?
I always say have age appropriate conversations starting as soon as you're having any conversation. So I give this analogy a lot. It's kind of a silly analogy, but when our child is very young, we start giving them the advice about how to brush their teeth. We show them how to brush their teeth. We do that for them. And then as they grow, as they age, we start reminding them when they can do it themselves. Have you brushed your teeth? Have you gone in and done that tonight? I'm going to check your toothbrush. We're going to make sure that you brushed your teeth. You know, that's going on from the time they're little to 6, 7. And then when they turn 12, you're like, have you remembered to brush your teeth today? And, you know, when they turn 15, did you brush your teeth? Because you know, your breath kind of stinks. Those are conversations we're having very young and continuing. But we want to act like the internet safety or just body safety and sexual safety and all of these things that we discuss when we're talking about this issue, that we want to have one talk and hope that, you know, it goes well and hope for the best. And that's not the way to do this. Start having age appropriate conversations very young, have them often, and then have them as your child ages. So there are a lot of resources that we can suggest, just like the NetSmarts and the KidSmarts resources. When they're very young, we start talking about body safety. Calling body parts by their anatomical names prevents miscommunication or misunderstanding if something does happen. Knowing that you can talk with your child about trusted adults that they have in their life that they could always go to if something happens, anything. If something that someone does makes them feel uncomfortable, that you have a list of people that the child knows, these are my trusted adults, and I can always go to them and tell them when someone has done something or said something that makes me feel uncomfortable. And then as they grow in age and they start to access electronic devices and applications, that's when you start having, the minute you give an electronic device to a child, that's when you have the conversation about what's out there. Not to scare your kid, but to have the conversation that there are people that may wish to do them harm, and that you're prepared for it, and that you're going to prevent that by discussing what's appropriate online, what's not appropriate, how to protect them online. And then as they grow in age from very, very young, you're involved. You're making sure that you're keeping on top of and on track with what they're doing online, and that at any point you can pull their device and monitor it and go through it and comb through the messages. My kids are still fairly young, 9 and 11, and they know at any point I'm going to take their device. They may be on it, they may be not on it, they may be asleep when I come in and grab the device and then go through messages, but knowing that that's always possible, they know that they can't hide anything, and that's a good way to start. And then as they get older, you're not trying to play catch up and trying to do something when they're 14 and 15 and have established habits, because you've already done that when they're growing up and learning those things.
So I just wanted to interject here. Detective Branham, I've heard you talk about this before, where going back to the gaming, you sometimes kind of pop in and you've made a kind of a fun, spontaneous check-in. We kind of talk about that, what you do whenever you go and check whenever your kids are playing on video games.
Sure, and I'm a big believer in making things just normal. If we start it when they're 6, like Detective Poor said, at a young age, by the time they're 14 and 15, they just expect goofy dad to come in and, hey, let me see what you got going. Hey, let me see your headphones and play the game. And at some point, your friends, his friends, and him, they both just go, that's my dad. And they go, okay. But all I've done is wiggle my way in there just enough to be able to jump in and see what they're doing. I have a plan. I know what I'm looking for. He thinks I'm just a nerd, which is fine. I'm doing my job. It's all well. But at the same time, I want to make sure he's safe. And I don't want it to be a fight. But then again, I'm not his friend. I'm not trying to be, here we go. But I'm going to do it in a way where we're not having confrontation every time I check his phone. Now he just thinks it's normal. And I'm going to continue that till he's 16, 17, and 18 and protect him. That's my job as a dad. And I think I'm doing a pretty decent one at this point.
If you're doing a check on your child's phone and you do find that someone has sent them inappropriate content, is it best to immediately delete it, forward it to yourself? Like what should the very first step be?
That's a great question. Actually, the don'ts being more than the do's. Like I said earlier, the don't would include don't forward it to yourself, because if that becomes what we would call an investigation evidence, now we're stuck seizing your child's device and your device because they both contain that evidence, particularly if it's maybe something that might be considered as child pornography as the statutes define it. So that would be illegal for you to have as well. So what we always say is if you can turn your phone, the device into an airplane mode to disconnect it from being allowed to delete somehow, either through direct access or indirect access, do that and then contact your local law enforcement. Please don't forward it on to yourself. Don't delete it, because depending on what it is, and that's why I say we can't know every scenario, but depending on the extent to which it's gone, it may be criminal. And if it rises to a criminal matter, we don't want to have to try and recover it if we can just not delete it from the start. So that's a great question. And that's what parents often do in a panic and sort of a knee-jerk reaction out of shock. You know, when they see something on their kid's device, they think, oh, I've got to get this off of there. I've got to get it to my phone so it's not on their kid's device. If that's occurred, you know, I understand that it may be an inconvenience for not being able to reach the child, but probably best to keep that device, if it's a phone, in your possession until the local law enforcement or authorities give you guidance on what to do next.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? All right, well, if you're watching this video on social media, please look into the post itself. We've attached all the resources that our detectives mentioned today. And before we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our parents in the audience who took time to come up with these questions. I want to thank our detectives and Officer Melina for just being here today, for being present and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. It's a very different time in the world that any of us have really ever lived before. And the fact that you guys are taking time to share what you know in a way that's understandable for parents and kind of alleviate some of those anxieties, I think it means the world. So thank you everyone for your time. And as always, if you see something, say something, call 911, whether it's just you think it's nothing, you think it's something, happy to help. And we want you to feel safe. So thank you everyone and have a great day.